Is there anything you can do to move this trial along, or do you just have to wait for Pelosi to do what she's going to do?
We're quite confident that this position is untenable and she's going to move it along, and that Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell reach a deal on how it's going to proceed in the Senate.
So you think that she'll eventually give in?
She will yield. There's no way she can hold this position.
The Vice President's Chief of Staff, Mark Short, seems really confident that Nancy Pelosi will yield to the Republican senators and transmit the articles of impeachment to the Senate. Nancy Pelosi. Joining me now is Jill Wine-Banks, former Assistant Watergate Special Prosecutor and author of The Watergate Girl, Glenn Kirshner, former federal prosecutor and legal analyst for NBC News, and Midwin Charles, civil trial and criminal defense attorney. Thank you all for being here. I got to go to Jill Wine-Banks on this first. Let me play one more, and this is also Mark Short. He's been making the rounds this morning. This was him on Meet the Press.
You want to see a trial start as soon as possible.
I think
number one, right?
Well, I think the president wants to prove his innocence, and so he
wants witnesses.
I think the president has articulated he's open to witnesses, Chuck, but I think at the same time...
the legal team doesn't. Is
no,
that fair to say or no?
I think at the same time, the American people are tired of this sham. They're tired of this whole thing. And I think we're anxious to get back to the work for the American people. So, you know, to the extent that there's a prolonged trial, we're not anxious for that. We're anxious to say, let's get back to working for things the American people said they wanted.
Okay, so, right. But it sounds to me like when you put together Mark Short 1 and Mark Short 2, it sounds like the person who's actually under pressure here is Mitch McConnell. Because the only person saying, oh, no, we don't want a trial, don't send those articles over here, keep those articles away from me, is Mitch McConnell. Donald Trump has made it very clear he wants a trial and he's open to witnesses. So, okay, it sounds like that is what Nancy Pelosi wants, too.
Well, Donald Trump may be open to witnesses until they're actually called, because if he wanted those witnesses, he would have let them testify at the House. None of the witnesses that the Democrats want will exculpate the president. They will all have testimony that will be very damaging to him, and yet those are the witnesses that have direct knowledge of the facts that are at issue. They are the people who need to be heard by the American people so that American voters can judge for themselves whether the president has done what he is accused of. There is already ample evidence of that. It's very clear from those who have been brave enough to testify. But as long as the president raises a question about, well, I'm really innocent, there's nothing there, and writes totally loony-toony letters to Nancy Pelosi, and no one should underestimate the power of Nancy Pelosi, then we have to have those witnesses. So I hope he's right. Let the witnesses be called. Let America have a trial. But if there's not going to be legitimate witnesses who have been withheld, then there's no reason to go to a trial. There is absolutely nothing to be gained.
Well, Glenn Kerr, I'm going to go to my prosecutor and then my defense attorney, because it seems to me that the prosecution's best friend in this entire impeachment thing is Donald Trump. Because these senators only say what Donald Trump says they can say, right? They're all going to speak for him. Mitch McConnell's trying to sing a different tune and say no trial, which actually is probably Trump's best, defense, is not to do it at all. Because if any witnesses were to come forward, they would be Rudy Giuliani and people like Mick Mulvaney, who all implicate Trump in the crime further than he's done himself. Here's Roy Blunt of Missouri saying what I presumed he thinks Donald Trump wants him to say.
Frankly, don't think the Speaker has the right to do this or the power to do this. The Speaker has a lot of power. But once the House has spoken, the Speaker doesn't get the decision as to whether or not she transmits that decision to the Senate, in my view. I think it's a mistake on the Speaker's part. I think this has looked pretty political anyway, and this is sort of the icing on the political cake.
They want this to be sent to the Senate, and Donald Trump wants witnesses. Won't that be very detrimental to him either way? If they don't get the trial, he just sits there impeached. If they get the trial, Rudy Giuliani buries him.
Yeah, Joy, Donald Trump doesn't want any relevant witnesses. What he wants are the Hunter Bidens and the whistleblowers, and, Hillary Clinton's email server perhaps will swear that in and try to find some emails. He wants to make this into a show trial, being the showman that he is. He doesn't want John Bolton to testify about what he saw in real time, the abuses, the corruption, and the crime inside the administration. prompting him to call the whole dang thing a drug deal. You don't call it a drug deal unless it's pretty incriminating. But, you know, Joy, one of the things that, you know, we are all obsessing about, rightfully so, is whether this trial will result in the conviction and removal of the president. But, you know, every trial has the potential to set precedent. And the other precedent that will be set in this trial, make no mistake about it, if these senators clear the president of wrongdoing, is they will give him the green light for future foreign interference in our elections. They will give him the green light to attach personal conditions to every congressional funding bill that they pass.
Yep.
And they will be giving him the green light to do away with congressional oversight of the executive branch, because those are the things he did. If they clear him of these charges, we're going to have a government that is not recognizable to us.
Yeah, this is monarchism. I mean, they would essentially be making him essentially a king, because they would have no authority over the presidency anymore. The presidency would be free to spend money, which is the House's job. He would take that authority away from the House. That is what these Republicans are saying. Go ahead and do that. Here's Ron Johnson, who's involved, by the way. He was one of the emissaries who's gone back and forth on Ukraine. Here he is on ABC. Again, this is proof, I think, that Nancy Pelosi is pretty darn smart. She has them convulsing and demanding a trial. They're now freaking out because they can't have a trial. Here's Ron Johnson.
It's kind of bizarre. They had to rush to this impeachment vote, and then all of a sudden she's sitting on it. I don't think the Senate should be making the case the House should have made in their presentation. My guess is they weren't able to make the case. As I said, the charges are pretty thin gruel. I don't see anything impeachable in that. So it's just not the job of the Senate to make the case that the House should have made in their impeachment clause or in their impeachment articles of impeachment.
So again, because Donald Trump wouldn't let their witnesses testify. So now they're saying, well, those witnesses didn't testify, therefore there's no case. So now they're saying we demand a trial with none of those witnesses.
Right.
Democrats are never going to agree to that. Chuck Schumer is not going to risk his entire caucus lighting on fire by agreeing to that. So there are two choices. Either Donald Trump sits there impeached and in agony and gets no trial, or the Democrats negotiate a deal in which at least some of these witnesses testify. Neither of these are good for him. I don't see how this is anything other than the Speaker having won this fight.
Absolutely. And finally, right, I love it. I just love it. I love the fact that the Democrats, Nancy Pelosi, finally have the Republicans in stitches, squirming.
They don't even have a consistent position.
And they're powerless, finally, right? For a long time, I think we have seen Republicans play this game. For example, when Mitch McConnell refused to seat Merrick Garland, he was the one in charge. He was the one calling the shots. And I think for a long time, myself and a lot of people have been saying, why aren't Democrats playing the same exact game? And not necessarily for wrongdoing, right? I mean, Mitch McConnell did it to kind of subvert the Constitution. But what Nancy Pelosi is doing is in order to get to the truth, right? So the method she's using is similar to what Mitch McConnell did, but she's doing it so that she can get to the truth, i.e. have these witnesses testify. We don't want a sham trial. We don't want to show. This is not, the next episode of impeachment today. We want a real trial where all the evidence can be heard and everybody can come to a conclusion on their own. But I also want to say what I think is much dispiriting is when you played some of those clips from some of those senators and elected officials. Gone is the day when a senator or an elected official had independent thought. Like, why are they all falling in line, hook and sinker, behind Donald Trump and parroting the exact same phrases and the exact same? There's no individuality anymore. And I can't understand how the people who put these men and women into office are comfortable with that.
Here's the problem.
There's no discernment. There's no individual thought at all. It's like a cult.
It is a monarchism. It's monarchism, and here's what's fun.
It's also corruption, by the way.
Yeah, and that ain't going to work in Colorado, Arizona. It's not necessarily going to work in Maine. Some of these Republican senators can't take that home and sell that. That's the problem for them. Jill Wine-Banks, Glenn Kirshner, Midwin Charles, thank you all very much for being here. And up next, Who Won the Week? They can't sell that in Colorado. No. In Colorado.